asked to graph and find a piecewise formula for the function f of x equals the absolute value of x minus 2 over x minus 2. First, let's take a look at the function and determine if there are any domain restrictions. Particularly, examine the denominator and notice that we have x minus 2. Are there any values of x for which we have an undefined value for the function? Yes, we cannot plug in 2 for x, or we get 0 in the denominator, which would produce undefined division. So we know that x cannot equal 2. Next, we take a look at the function and decide where the domain is going to split. That domain split is always given to us by the absolute value function, because there's a value at which the absolute value isn't really necessary, because what's inside is going to be positive anyway. And then after that value, or less than that value, then we need the absolute value bars because it makes what's inside positive. So if we take a look at the absolute value of x minus 2, the domain split is actually going to happen at 2. Because whenever we plug in 2 or anything above that, we don't really need the absolute value bars because it's going to be positive. The absolute value bars don't do anything. But when we plug in anything less than 2, so for instance 1, we need those absolute value bars. It's what makes the x minus 2 become a positive value overall. So then we could start to consider what's going to happen. Whenever x is greater than 2, not equal to, because remember we can't plug in 2 or it makes the denominator equal 0, then we end up with the function f of x equals x minus 2 over x minus 2. Because the absolute value bars aren't necessary. Anything 2 and above for x is going to make the top part positive, so we don't need those absolute value bars. We just drop them off. If we end up with x minus 2 over x minus 2, hopefully you realize that that's the same numerator and denominator, so we divide and we reduce, ending up with 1. So x minus 2 over x minus 2 is 1. Now consider what happens if we have x values that are less than 2. Again, remember, not equal to 2. So if we have a value that's less than 2, we need those absolute value bars to make the top positive. But if we drop the absolute value bars off, remember, another way to make something that's going to be negative positive is to negate it. So we take the x minus 2 that's on the top and just put a negative sign in front of it. We're sure that if we plug in a value less than 2, then x minus 2, that quantity is going to be negative. We want to make it positive, so we put a negative sign in front of it. That's the same thing that we had been doing a lot of when we algebraically solved inequalities with absolute values. We would split it up into the two possibilities. One of them the positive version, one of them the negative version. So it's the same idea here. We end up with negative, that x minus 2, over top of x minus 2. When we reduce that and cross out, they reduce still to 1 to 1. However, we have that negative sign, so overall it's a negative 1 value. Thus, when we write our piecewise function f of x equals the pieces, our y value f of x is 1 whenever x is greater than 2, and negative 1 whenever x is less than 2. Remember, we can't put an equal sign with either of these because the bottom cannot be 2, or we have division by 0. So now we're faced with actually graphing this piecewise function. We found our piecewise formula, and now we need to graph it. Remember that f of x is the same thing as y, so think of this as y equals 1 whenever x is greater than 2. So if y equals 1, do you remember what kind of line that is? That's right, it's a horizontal line. So if we think about graphing the horizontal line y equals 1 whenever x is greater than 2, we want to start off at the point 2, 1, x is 2, y is 1, but we don't want to be equal to it. We want that open circle. And then we want to graph the horizontal line, y equals 1, for everything where x is bigger than 2. We don't want to graph less than 2, so we don't go to the left of our open circle, we go to the right of it. Then we graph our second piece, y equals negative 1. Again, it's going to be a horizontal line. We want that horizontal line for everything where x is less than 2. Again, not equal to 2. So we need an open circle at 2, negative 1. When x is 2, y is negative 1, but not equal to it, so an open circle. And then we graph our horizontal line, everything to the left. Y equals -1 whenever x is less than 2, so it's to the left side of the x value of 2. This is our piecewise graph.